What would you do if you discovered that rituals take place inside the Vatican that no one imagined, and that a former nun has just revealed everything? Imagine for a moment that the sacred corridors of the Vatican, the ultimate symbol of the Christian faith, hide beneath layers of silence and centuries of censorship, secret rituals, forbidden symbols and ceremonies that were never intended for public view. We are not talking about empty theories, but about Vatican secrets who have been
carefully protected in the shadows by religious leaders who have sworn to keep the world in ignorance. In this surprising revelation, a former nun broke her vow of silence to tell what saw it with his own eyes. A macabre ritual conducted in the heart of the church, involving ancient symbols, texts not recognized by the Bible, and authority figures that defy everything we have been taught about holiness and truth. What exists behind the Vatican walls? They would just be historical archives and sacred relics, or an arsenal of secret documents, banned books and occult practices that expose a forbidden history of Christianity. Many scholars, historians, and even religious people were already suspicious. But now, with this report, new evidence is emerging that what happens inside goes far beyond what the public can even imagine. We're talking about unknown underground rooms, restricted passages, and hidden ceremonies performed far from the eyes of humanity. And this is not an assumption. It is the testimony of those who lived inside, of those who were part of the sacred structure of the church, and one day decided to break the silence. If you think you've seen it all when it comes to the Vatican, get ready, because what you're going to hear now is unlike anything else. And make no mistake, the Vatican may have hidden this from you, but the truth finds a way to emerge, and it is precisely this truth that you are about to discover. But before we reveal the most shocking details of this ritual, you need to understand who this woman was, and why she decided to speak out now. You need to understand who this woman was, and why she decided to speak out now. This former nun lived for years within the most restricted structures of the church. He dedicated his life to faith, sacred vows, and the spiritual routine imposed by religious orders. But something happened, something that shook his faith, an encounter, a ritual, a vision. She saw something she couldn't ignore. And, even in the face of threats, even knowing the risks, he decided to break the silence and tell everything. Not to get revenge, not for fame, but because he believes the truth must be revealed. That the world needs to know what is hidden. And right now, more than ever, we need light, of discernment, of prayer. Because we are dealing with spiritual forces, with ancient secrets that challenge the limits of faith and reason. So I make you a request. Write your prayer request in the comments. No matter what you are going through, doubts, fears, spiritual battles, write it down below. Let's pray together. Let's create a chain of faith. Because if the enemy acts in secret, we need to act with light. If you believe that the truth must be revealed, if you feel that there is something hidden and that it is time for the world to know, leave a like on this video. This helps spread this message to more people. Activate the notification bell and subscribe to the channel right now, because what you will discover here could change your perception of faith forever. And it's not over yet, because the scariest part is yet to come. She didn't just see the ritual. She described details, every gesture, every word spoken, every symbol on the floor of that dark room. And that's what we're going to reveal next. In recent years, several former members of the church have made controversial revelations. But this confession, made by a former nun who lived within the Vatican's sacred walls, is unlike anything we've ever heard. She is not just another testimony among many. What this woman revealed goes beyond rumors or rumors about the behind-the-scenes of faith. It goes beyond stories about secret documents or files hidden in the famous Vatican secret library. What she narrates in detail is an experience lived, witnessed, felt firsthand. Something that to this day affects your spirit and haunts your dreams. This nun, whose name we will not reveal here for safety reasons, spent years in silence. Not because I wanted to hide the truth, but because I was afraid. Real fear. Fear of reprisals from the very institution that swore to protect the faith. Fear of judgment, condemnation, isolation. After all, when you challenge the Vatican, you challenge centuries of power, of control, of silence carefully constructed throughout history. She was a witness to a ritual, an event that, according to her, was not part of any official church liturgy. It wasn't Mass. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't worship. It was something different, something dark. A select group, led by a figure of authority, a man in papal robes, but with attitudes that could never be considered sacred, met in a restricted space in the Vatican, an underground location that only the highest echelons of the church know about. She said she was taken there by mistake, that she shouldn't be in that hallway, but that something pushed her, guided her, as if she were led by an invisible force. When he realized he was faced with a scene that he would never forget. The room was lit only by red candles, positioned in a circle. In the center, a strange symbol drawn on the floor, which she later discovered was associated with ancient occult practices long before Christianity. The man in the black robe, with a cold and empty look, was standing over the symbol, holding an old book with a leather cover darkened by time. He murmured words in Latin, but it was not the Latin of the traditional liturgy. It was something more archaic, guttural, as if it invoked forces that did not belong to the light. And around him were other members of the church, all with the same fixed gaze, as if they were in a trance. She tried to move away. His instinct told him to run away, but his feet felt stuck to the floor. Fear paralyzed her. The faith that sustained her now trembled. What he saw before him didn't make sense. Why would leaders of the Catholic Church be participating in such a dark ritual? Why did that ceremony seem so contrary to the light of the gospel? What were they invoking there? After a few minutes, which felt like hours, she managed to get out. He disguised himself, walked, and didn't speak to anyone. But that same day, at night, she was called to speak to a superior. He didn't explain anything. He just looked into her eyes and said, "What you saw didn't happen. And if you insist on that, no one will believe you." At that moment, she understood that what she had witnessed was part of something much bigger, an invisible power structure which lives behind the scenes of the church, a hidden layer that coexists with public faith, but that acts in the shadows, manipulating, controlling, hiding secrets that could shake the foundations of Christian belief throughout the world. Over the next few days, she began to notice strange movements within the convent. People watching, doors that were always open before, now locked, voices whispering as they pass by, veiled threats, until he decided to ask for leave. He left the church, distanced himself from the clergy, and spent years in silence. But the weight of the truth was too great to bear alone. And that's how, sometime later, he decided to break the silence. Not with sensationalism, but with sincerity. She wanted people to know that not everything is as it seems inside the Vatican walls, that between the golden corridors and the sacred relics, there are dark spaces where secrets are hidden, rituals are performed, and the light sometimes goes out. And the most disturbing thing is that she is not alone. Since her story came to light, others have started speaking out. Former priests, monks, even scholars who had access to restricted documents began to reveal patterns, codes, hidden signs that show that this is not an isolated story. There is something happening deep within the Vatican, something that challenges our understanding of what is sacred. If you already suspected that there were Vatican secrets kept under lock and key, know that you are not alone. There is much more beneath the surface than we can see. Lost documents, books banned by the church, symbols erased from sacred texts, biblical passages suppressed, and ancient rituals preserved in the most absolute silence. And all of this raises an inevitable question. Why so much effort to hide it? Why the fear of these truths coming to light? The answer may lie in exactly what this nun saw and what she's telling us now. But before continuing with the deeper details of this testimony, because yes, she reported names, dates, specific locations, and even the contents of part of that ancient book, I want to ask you something very simple, but very important. If you've come this far, it's because you feel like something is being revealed. And perhaps, like her, you also carry doubts, experiences, even wounds related to your faith. Then, leave a prayer request here in the comments. Yes, right now. It could just be your name or a phrase like, "Pray for me." This gesture is important. It connects us. It strengthens us. Here, we are a community in search of truth, but also of light. Also right, The truth needs to be revealed in the comments. This shows that you are with us on this quest, that you also feel that the Vatican is hiding something much bigger than we think. And the next part of the revelation will make this even clearer. She claims to have witnessed a ritual that involved ancient symbols, chants in Latin, and important figures from the church. "I saw it with my own eyes, and I was shocked," he declared. His voice, despite being shaken, carried a firmness that only those who have experienced the inexplicable are capable of transmitting. It was as if the weight of that memory was being unloaded word by word in an attempt to get rid of what had haunted her since the day she entered, unintentionally, the darkest behind the scenes of the Vatican. This was not a rebellious nun or someone motivated by resentment. She was, above all, a seeker of truth, and what she saw challenged absolutely everything she had believed until then. The symbols she mentioned were not in any catechism, nor in religious training books. They were ancestral inscriptions, marked on the floor in a geometric pattern that she only understood months later, when she studied the origins of these traces on her own. Many of them referred to Gnosticism, Kabbalah, and elements that would never be associated with traditional Christian doctrine. But they were there, precisely traced within a room adorned by dark stone columns, with red tapestries hanging from the ceiling, as if they were there to absorb what would be summoned that night. The chants also did not belong to the known liturgy. They had a rasping, guttural sound, pronounced in archaic Latin, the kind of intonation that chills you to the bone. According to her, the sound vibrated on the walls like an inverted spiritual echo, which instead of elevating, seemed to pull down, as if it were invoking forces that inhabit other layers of reality. And among those present were men who occupied high positions, people known for their serene, humble public appearances, defenders of the faith, but who there, before their eyes, participated in something that was more reminiscent of a pact than a prayer. She says that at one point, the man leading the ritual, who wore a papal ring and wore black vestments with gold embroidery, with an empty, fixed gaze, lifted the book he was carrying. It was an ancient manuscript, bound in leather, with pages that looked centuries old. Upon opening it, she noticed that some words briefly glow red, as if reacting to the intonation of the chants. At that time, those present lowered their heads, as if they were about to receive or channel something. She couldn't see the contents of the book, but she realized that it wasn't an ordinary text. It was a sacred book to that group, sacred not in the spiritual Christian sense, but as an artifact of power, of control, perhaps even of invocation. The smell of the room also changed. She reports a strong, dense, almost metallic odor that mingled with the thick incense burning in every corner. The candles flickered as if influenced by an invisible presence. A chill ran down his spine, and it was at that moment that she knew. She was facing something that could never be explained as a religious ceremony. It was an occult ritual, carefully hidden from the world, and the fact that it was happening inside the Vatican made it all the more disturbing. The participants' eyes during the most intense point of the ritual appeared glassy, as if they were in a trance. Some murmured in unknown languages, others simply held their hands up, as if offering themselves. The feeling of spiritual weight was so strong that she thought she would faint, but he remained still, breathing slowly, trying not to make noise, not to attract attention. And this is where her story gains even more strength. She swears that for a few seconds, she saw a shadow appear behind the leader of the ritual, a dark, humanoid, faceless form that seemed to accompany the chants as if it were part of the invocation. This appearance was as quick as it was intense. She blinked, and the shadow disappeared. But the energy of that moment remained there, like a mark, like a spiritual record that was impossible to erase. From that moment on, she knew she would never be the same. What he witnessed could not be forgotten or denied. And it was also at that moment that she realized she needed to leave that place, that he needed to escape while he still had strength and sanity. But as many former church members who have had similar experiences report, leaving is not as simple as it seems. There is a silent pact among those who see too much, never to speak, because whoever speaks is discredited, persecuted, or worse. After the ritual, she spent days in absolute silence. His eyes betrayed terror, but no one dared to ask. She noticed different looks, whispers in the corridors, tension in the air, as if everyone knew she knew too much. One night, he heard knocking on the door of the room where he slept. It didn't open. The following day, its space had already been relocated to another convent outside of Rome. And it was only after years, away from religious life, with psychological support and a lot of study, that she managed to organize what she experienced and decided to record her testimony. This account is not just recorded in words. She drew the symbol, rewrote the fragments she could remember from the book, and still keeps a copy of the notes she made immediately after the incident. This evidence, according to experts who analyze the archives, is linked to ancient practices of mystical cults, many of which were absorbed or hidden throughout the history of the Church. One of the researchers stated that the central symbol she saw on the ground refers to a EX-NUN sect that believed it had direct access to lost divine knowledge, a type of forbidden wisdom that can only be obtained through rituals of total spiritual surrender. It is as if inside the Vatican, behind the golden walls and public speeches, a parallel layer of spiritual practice coexists, where the sacred and the profane mix in ways that defy any traditional Christian logic. And when she said, "I saw it with my own eyes," it wasn't a sound bite. It was a cry for help, a warning, a scream. If you're watching this far, it's because something inside you also feels like there are pieces missing from this story, that the Church, the Vatican, the upper echelons, hide more than they let on. Maybe you've never said it out loud, but have you ever wondered, what if all this is true? If so, we need to talk about it. We need to share. We need to open the eyes of those who still believe that everything is as it seems. According to the former nun, everything happened in an underground chamber, close to the secret library, a place inaccessible to most, but where she was taken by a trusted superior. She didn't question, didn't hesitate. He obeyed as he always did, with the blind discipline that years of religious life had taught him. After all, when someone in a high position within the Church gives you a direct order, you simply follow it. That's how she entered that hidden part of the Vatican, an underground labyrinth where forbidden archives and unrevealed secrets lie far from me. The eyes of the world, and where, as she discovered, it's not all spirituality and light. The entrance to this place, according to his report, was behind a false bookcase, disguised among thousands of old volumes that make up the corridors that give access to the Vatican secret library, one of the most mysterious and restricted spaces in the entire structure of the Holy See. The corridor was narrow, with damp stone steps that descended for meters, plunging into a darkness that only a few lit. Torches seemed to break through. Every step she took was accompanied by the muffled, echoing sound of her own feet, as if the walls of the church were watching and absorbing everything around her. When she reached the end of the stairs, she came face to face with a heavy antique iron door, studded with symbols that she didn't immediately recognize. There was a special lock, the kind that can only be opened with specific keys or silent permissions. The superior who accompanied her took a small, metallic object, triangular in shape, from his pocket and inserted it into the slot in the lock. The unlocking noise echoed like thunder in the darkness. She had never seen that door before. I had never even known that there was anything beyond the library. As he crossed it, he came across a circular chamber, almost like a crypt. The walls were covered in black tapestries with hand-embroidered golden symbols, symbols that she would later discover were linked to mystical orders, predating even the founding of the church as an organized institution. The floor was made of dark stone, with inscriptions engraved in concentric circles leading to the center of the space. At the exact point in the center, there was a pedestal, also made of stone, where the same book that she would see hours later being used in the ritual rested. What caught his attention most was the silence, a heavy silence, which carried something indescribable, as if that room had been built not to host prayers, but to contain something. It was the kind of space that seemed to have a life of its own, a presence. She felt it on her skin, like a dense energy that enveloped everything around. She tried not to show discomfort, but her racing heart gave away what her expression was trying to hide. The superior, who was walking in front of her, suddenly stopped, slowly turned around, looked into her eyes and said, "You were chosen to see. Not everyone is." Those words echoed in his mind for days. Chosen to see. See what? See why? Was it a test? An ordeal? A preparation for something bigger? Or was it simply a form of control? A way to involve her in something she could never escape? She didn't know it yet, but something inside her already said she had crossed an invisible line. She was no longer just a nun. He was now a witness to one of the Vatican's darkest secrets. A few hours after being taken to that chamber, she was summoned again. This time at night, with the warning that there would be a special celebration. The term sounded strange to him, but he didn't question it. She was instructed to wear a dark cloak and maintain absolute silence. Upon returning to that underground chamber, he noticed that there were other hooded figures already positioned in a circle. Nobody spoke. They just waited. When everyone was ready, the same man who guided her earlier came in carrying the ancient book. The atmosphere became even more tense. The candles lit on the sides cast shadows that danced. On the walls, as if they had a mind of their own. The ritual began with a low chant, which gradually grew in volume and intensity. They were not familiar words. It was not ecclesiastical Latin. It was something more primal, more ancient. The intonation seemed to affect the surrounding space itself. The air became heavier. The nun, positioned discreetly among the others, tried to control her breathing. I didn't know exactly what I would witness, but I felt there was no going back. At one point, the man in the center of the circle began to sing an excerpt from the book out loud, and it was at that moment that the inscriptions on the ground began to glow red. The stone seemed to heat up. She felt heat rising to her feet, a heat that did not burn the skin, but the spirit. It was as if something was being summoned. She knew it wasn't just an act. What happened there had real spiritual weight, and she, against her will, was part of that now. And then, again, the shadowy figure appeared, behind the celebrant. A shadow with shape, but without a face. A presence, but without origin. She blinked hard, rubbed her eyes, but the silhouette remained there, motionless, as if it were the entity everyone was waiting for. The chanting stopped. Silence took over the room, and it was at that exact second that she realized that everyone was kneeling, with their hands extended towards that presence. Except her. She was the only one standing, alone. Witnessed something you should never have seen. After the ceremony ended, everyone left in silence, as if nothing had happened. Nobody spoke. Nobody exchanged glances. The man with the book put away the manuscript, and, as he passed her, whispered, "Now you understand why you can't tell her anything." She didn't sleep that night. He spent hours in prayer, in crying, in deep silence. And in the days that followed, she was overcome by a feeling of persecution. Not physical, but spiritual. I felt like I was being watched. He felt as if he had carried something from that chamber inside him. And that was what led her, years later, to seek support outside the church, trying to understand what he really witnessed, studying, comparing symbols, translating fragments of what he managed to memorize. And the more he studied, the more he became convinced that there was something hidden in the basements of the Vatican, something that is deeply intertwined with the Church's darkest past, and that to this day remains active. If you've come this far, it's because you also feel that there is something strange behind the sacred facade that is presented to us. If this story touched something inside you, I want to ask you to write in the comments, "I see what they hide." This phrase shows that you are attentive, awake. And if you want to strengthen this chain even further, write too. The truth needs to come out of the shadows. This not only increases our reach, it connects people like you who are searching for answers that the Vatican prefers to keep buried. She described a silent ceremony, filled with candles, strange symbols on the floor, and an ancient book, which she said was not the Bible. A dark chant echoed in the room. The flickering candlelight created dancing shadows on the damp stone walls, as if the symbols drawn there came to life in the shadows. There was something deeply wrong in that place. Even without understanding the details, the former nun felt that each element of that ceremony contradicted everything she had learned in her years at the convent. Nothing there resembled the divine worship that I knew. It was as if I was witnessing an inversion of the sacred liturgy, a distorted reflection of faith, led by men who should represent the light, but who instead gave themselves over to the deepest darkness. She spoke precisely about the shape of the symbols on the floor. He said they were overlapping circles with triangular marks at each cardinal point, and that the center was filled with a spiral that twisted toward nothingness. Something in her instinctively recognized that that design was more than symbolic. It was functional. It had a purpose, as if it served to channel or imprison some type of spiritual energy. Around the main circle were placed candles, 7 in total, each with a flame that flickered in an unnatural, almost hypnotic way. The air was thick. There was no wind, but the flames seemed to react to the sound of the chants. This dark chant resembled no hymn or psalm she knew. There was no harmony or melody. It was more like a lament, something guttural, muffled, repetitive, designed to induce an altered state of consciousness. It was impossible not to be affected. The nun said that for a moment, she felt her own mind move away, as if it were being pulled out of her body. It was a feeling of detachment from reality, and it was at that moment that he realized that this was not just an aesthetic ritual or an act. Something real was happening, something spiritual, something that involved forces beyond human understanding. The book on the central pedestal was one of the most disturbing points in the story. She described it in great detail. Aged leather cover, with a carved symbol, an eye surrounded by intertwined serpents, spitting fire in 3 directions. The pages were thick, with a texture reminiscent of ancient parchment, and the letters weren't Latin. She said they looked like runes, but with features similar to Aramaic and Sanskrit, an impossible mixture, as if the book's content were the result of eras and cultures brought together with a single objective: to keep a secret hidden from humanity. When the man in the black robe began to read this book aloud, the entire room seemed to react. The temperature dropped. The ground shook subtly. She swore she heard voices whispering in the background, but she didn't know where they were coming from. The vibe of the space changed. It was as if the place had been sealed in another dimension. Those present began to respond in unison, repeating short passages that seemed like invocations. Some people's eyes rolled. Others trembled, as if they were ecstatic or possessed. The former nun remained motionless, observing everything with a mixture of fear, disbelief, and a curiosity that only those who have had their faith shaken can understand. She couldn't believe what she saw, but at the same time she knew she wasn't dreaming. During the chant, a reddish light appeared from the ground, exactly in the center of the spiral symbol. It was like an ember that lit up out of nowhere, slowly pulsing like an evil heart. That light didn't illuminate. On the contrary, it seemed to absorb the surrounding light, and the more the ritual leader read, the more intense the light became. The air became charged with electricity. The nun reported that her hair stood on end, and that a high-pitched buzzing began to vibrate inside her head. It was at that moment that she saw the shadowy figure again, standing behind the reader. Unlike the first time, the shadow now appeared solid, almost physical, with long, curved arms and a misshapen head. She had no face, but still, she felt like she was being watched. It was as if the entity knew that she was the only one there who was not part of it, the only one who did not accept that pact. She wanted to scream, run, but I couldn't. His muscles were locked, the legs heavy as lead. And then something even more disturbing happened. The man in the center stopped reading, raised his hands, and pointed directly at her. I didn't say anything. He just kept his finger extended, as if he had chosen her. And at that moment, everyone else present slowly turned their faces towards him. She felt completely exposed, as if everyone knew that she was there by chance, that she was not initiated, that she did not belong to that circle. But instead of punishment or reaction, there was only silence. A terrifying silence, which lasted seconds, but seemed like an eternity. After that, the ritual ended abruptly. The lights went out. The candles were blown out one by a cold breeze that came out of nowhere. The figures got up and left silently, as if nothing had happened. The man with the book closed the manuscript with a dry click, wrapped it in a dark cloth, and took it with him. The room was quickly emptied. The nun, still paralyzed, took minutes to move. When he left the chamber, he realized that it was already dawn. She walked back to the convent without saying a word, with the certainty that she would never be the same. In the days that followed, she tried to rationalize what she saw. He tried to find explanations, but none of them made sense. The only possible conclusion was that he had witnessed a occult ritual carried out inside the Vatican, led by high-ranking figures with restricted access to the darkest corners of the institution. And more than that, she was certain that that ritual was just a piece of something bigger, an invisible network that unites the past, present and future of the Church around a deep secret. A secret that has never been revealed to the public, and that is probably kept among the banned books from the Vatican secret library, far from the reach of any curious person. After the ritual, she was threatened. If you talk about it, no one will believe it, and you might not even live to tell the story, they told her. In fear, she fled the order. He fled not only physically, but spiritually as well. He left behind the habits, the vows, the cloistered walls, and the routine that for years shaped his life and his faith. But what she carried now was heavier than any penance she had ever done. It was a secret that burned inside, that gnawed at the soul, that pulsed like an open wound, impossible to ignore. It wasn't just a memory of what he saw that night, in that underground chamber of the Vatican. It was the certainty that something terrible was happening behind the walls that the entire world sees as sacred. She didn't escape in a cinematic way. There was no rush. Everything was subtle, silent, as if it were part of a carefully executed plan to avoid attracting attention. She knew that the eyes of the Vatican are many, and they are everywhere. So he pretended to be sick. He requested time off to rest. He invented symptoms that seemed believable and waited for the right moment for them to disappear. And so he did. With few belongings and no concrete plan, he simply left. He disappeared from the institution's sight, but never from its thoughts. Has the Church forgotten her? No, she knew better. The Vatican never forgets someone who saw what they shouldn't have. During the first few months after her escape, she lived like a shadow, without documents, without fixed whereabouts, depending on the help of ordinary people who didn't even know who she was. He ended up living in abandoned houses, sleeping on park benches, until he got help through an organization that supports ex-religious people. Even there, he was reluctant to speak. I was afraid of being heard, of being located. She feared that her voice, if raised, would draw the attention of those behind that dark ritual, because she was sure that this group was not an isolated exception, but part of a larger, secret, hidden structure, carefully protected by the Vatican's upper layers. As time passed, she began to record what she remembered, not to report it, not yet, but not to forget. I wrote down dates, names, symbols, sensations. He researched on his own what the drawings he saw, the songs he heard, the excerpts from the old book meant. And the more I looked for answers, the more I realized that everything was connected. Many of the elements used in that ceremony were present in ancient, apocryphal manuscripts, in books that the Church itself had declared as heretical. Books that, for some reason, were not completely destroyed, but kept in restricted places, such as the house itself, Vatican's secret library. She discovered that for centuries, there has been a veiled dualism within the ecclesiastical structure. The public and sacred face, which preaches faith, charity, love, and the hidden, esoteric side, which deals with power, spiritual control, and in some cases, rituals that border on the forbidden. This second face never appears to the public, but it is the one that holds the knowledge of the oldest texts, the unofficial interpretations of the Bible, the encrypted messages that saints and theologians left throughout history. And this hidden structure is silent, disciplined, extremely well organized. Nothing escapes your eyes. Upon understanding this, she started to question everything. Did other members of the Church also know and chose to remain silent? Could it be that priests and nuns who, like her, lived for years within the institution, also witnessed something and chose to remain silent? Or were they silenced? History has precedents. Over the centuries, there have been mysterious disappearances, monks who disappeared without a trace, manuscripts that were burned without explanation, scholars excommunicated for discovering forbidden things. She was now part of that cycle. It was another piece that, if not taken care of, could be discarded. Even so, in the midst of fear, the need to tell arose. Not to confront, not to directly accuse, but to warn. She didn't want revenge. I wanted spiritual justice. I wanted people to know that the faith they profess, in many cases sincere, is being manipulated by forces that have nothing divine about them. What is their secret rituals in the Vatican, carried out by people who should represent the sacred, but who, in the darkness of the underground chambers, revere something that goes in the opposite direction to the light? That's how she found an independent researcher, someone who had also been investigating the religious conspiracies involving the Vatican, especially everything that refers to apocryphal books, censored documents, and hidden prophecies. With him, she felt safe to open up a little more. He began to tell parts of his story. He shared drawings, notes, memories, and he, in turn, put her in contact with other ex-religious people. Little by little, she discovered that she was not alone, that there were other voices, other memories, other eyes that also saw what they shouldn't have. Some of these reports matched hers. Others were even darker. They all had one thing in common: the presence of something that does not belong to official Christian doctrine, but that is, in some way, embedded in the bowels of the Church. A spiritual presence that feeds on secrecy, reverence, and fear. Something that stays alive precisely because no one dares to talk about it. And when someone speaks, they are discredited, labeled crazy, a heretic, or simply disappear. She didn't want that fate, but I also couldn't remain silent. I knew that at some point I would need to tell everything. And that's when he decided to share his story with the world. Not in search of fame, not for money, but because carrying this weight alone was tearing her apart. It was as if the energy from that chamber was still trapped in her mind, in her spirit, trying to silence her forever. So she recorded it, on video, in text, in audio. He left everything documented, in different places with different people. Said, "If something happens to me, don't let it die." And that's why this story is now coming to you. Because she doesn't want to run away anymore. Because the truth, once revealed, needs to continue echoing, even if the body that brought it has disappeared. And this echo needs to be shared. If you are here, listening to all this with a racing heart and a restless mind, if you feel that this story speaks to you, leave the sentence in the comments, "The truth can no longer be silenced." Or write, "I believe her," to show that this voice is not alone. Your comment may seem small, but it has power. It shows the algorithm and the world that there are still people searching for the truth. Officially, the Vatican has never recognized the existence of secret rituals. Any accusation is treated as fiction or misinterpretation. But is it really? This is the question that echoes in the minds of thousands of people who, like you, have begun to piece together loose pieces, disjointed accounts, forgotten documents, and hushed testimonies, forming an increasingly clear picture. A picture that shows a hidden side of the Church, hidden beneath layers of silence, symbolism, and spiritual power. It is precisely at this point that the story of this former nun begins to gain even more strength. Because when ancient institutions like the Vatican react with absolute silence in the face of such serious allegations, the lack of response turns for many into a non-verbal confirmation. For centuries, the Vatican has had one of its greatest virtues as its ability to control narratives, control what is said, what is taught, what is considered heresy, and what is considered divine truth. This authority was manifested not only in the pulpits, but also behind the scenes, in hidden halls, in libraries where books are kept that the public will never see, the so-called books banned by the Church, texts that were taken from the scriptures, manuscripts that questioned dogmas, apocryphal gospels that presented alternative versions of the life of Christ, and even records of ceremonies that look more like occult rituals than worship practices. When a figure like this former nun, who lived for years within the sacred walls of the Church, claims to have witnessed a secret ritual with unknown symbols, chants in ancient languages, and the presence of members of the highest hierarchy, the least one would expect would be an investigation. But what happens? Silence, discredit, disqualification. Instead of investigating, the Vatican remains silent. Instead of clarifying, he accuses of misrepresentation. And when someone tries to bring up this dark side of institutionalized faith, they are quickly labeled a conspirator, a heretic, or mentally unstable. This stance raises legitimate questions. Why does an institution that preaches light act with so much shadow when faced with delicate topics? If these stories really are false, why not expose evidence that they are unfounded? Why not show the world that there is nothing to hide? And, mainly, why do so? Many documents remain locked under layers of maximum surveillance in Vatican secret library, with access restricted even to cardinals. Is the reason the same as that which led this nun to run away? Could it be that the stories circulating among scholars, independent researchers, and even other religious people are actually fragments of a truth that the Vatican is fighting to keep hidden? This woman's report is not isolated. There are historical records of similar accusations. Priests who abandoned their positions and then mysteriously disappeared. Manuscripts given to the press and which disappeared before being published. Recordings erased. Files confiscated. There is a constant attempt to bury what could, in fact, expose the hidden side of an organization that, in the eyes of the world, represents the purity of faith. But what this former nun experienced, and had the courage to report, connects with a series of other episodes that, when analyzed together, make it clear that, nay, there is a pattern, a silent, efficient, and relentless modus operandi. She said that after escaping, she sought refuge in alternative communities, including groups that study marginal theology and non-canonical texts. And it was in these environments that he began to better understand what he saw that night in the underground chamber. Many of the symbols she described are linked to what some scholars call Vatican secret theology, a current that has never been officially admitted, but which has roots in ancient mystical traditions prior to Christianity itself. This line of thought suggests that early church leaders absorbed some of the occult knowledge of ancient peoples, Egyptians, Babylonians, Essenes, and hid this knowledge under symbolic codes accessible only to an initiated elite. This elite, as she discovered, still exists, and he performs rituals to this day, not openly, of course, but in a veiled way, at specific times, in places that most people don't even know exist. Underground crypts, wings not accessed by visitors, secret rooms inside ancient convents. And the most disturbing thing, she discovered that some of these rituals are documented, recorded in secret codices that remain out of reach of the population. Codices that provide not only instructions for rituals, but also names of participants, dates, locations, and spiritual intentions. And upon discovering this, she understood that her escape didn't just make her a former nun seeking peace, it made her a living threat to a system that depends on silence to continue existing. But how can we face a spiritual empire that spans 2,000 years? How can we tell the world that what many venerate as sacred can, in the shadows, be involved in practices that challenge the most basic principles of faith? She knew she couldn't do this alone, and that's why you're hearing this story today. Because you, like many others who have made it this far, feel that there is something behind the curtain. Something that is not told in sermons, something that is not explained in the catechisms, something that can only be understood by those who are willing to go beyond the surface and delve deep into the Vatican mysteries. Today, she lives in anonymity, in fear. He says he still receives threats, but he decided to speak out because the world needs to know the truth. These words, which may seem simple at first, carry immense weight when they come from someone who has faced the deepest shadows of an institution as powerful as the Vatican. She no longer lives as a nun, no longer uses religious habits, no longer attends churches, no longer has ties to any order, but she has never managed to free herself from what she saw. And now, even though she is afraid of the possible consequences, she has decided to break the silence once and for all, because she understands that it is not just about her. It is about all of us, about the right to know, about freeing what has been imprisoned for centuries in the name of control, manipulation, and fear. She keeps moving. It never stays at the same address for long. It doesn't share its location, avoids social networks, communicates only through encrypted channels, and keeps its circle of trust reduced to a minimum. Since he began to show signs that he would reveal the details of the secret ritual he witnessed in the Vatican underground, he began to receive anonymous calls, encrypted messages with veiled threats, and even silent visits.
People parking in front of his house in the early hours of the morning, lights that turned on and off in the courtyard of nearby abandoned buildings, figures watching through the windows. All signs that she is being watched, signs that there is indeed a real interest in keeping her quiet. But what was once paralyzing now drives her. The fear remains, but the conviction has grown. She understood that if the truth isn't told now, it may never be. When deciding to speak, she chose not to trust
the traditional press or official channels. She knew she would be easily discredited, distorted, or even silenced before her story reached the public. Therefore, he looked for alternative means. He contacted independent researchers, alternative journalists and content creators who work precisely with the Vatican secrets, religious conspiracies, hidden biblical texts, and everything that, for centuries, has been buried under the stone structures of institutionalized faith. The decision was strategic. If the truth needs to come to light, it needs to be in the hands of those who have the courage to speak out. And that's why this story got here. The details she still keeps are more specific than many imagine. She doesn't just have vague memories or feelings. She has dates, it has names, it has faces, it has fragments of texts, it has precise descriptions of the costumes worn, the words chanted, and the spiritual reactions felt during the ritual. And the most impressive thing, she has in-depth knowledge about the meanings of the symbols she saw, as she spent years studying the origins of each one of them. These are symbols that do not appear in any common Bible, nor in the Church's liturgical manuals. These are marks that date back to antiquity, to mysticism, to the occult, that many believe to have been banned from Christian history, but which, in reality, may have only been integrated in silence under another guise. She discovered that there are cross-references between the symbols she saw on the floor of the chamber and drawings hidden in the stained glass windows of ancient chapels, especially in churches built between the 12th and 14th centuries. In many of these places, the faithful would never realize that they are facing something deeper, but scholars know. There are visual codes, ciphers, signs embedded in every detail. The Church has always communicated with two languages, one for the people, the other for the initiated. What the former nun saw was the side reserved for initiates, those who know what is behind the liturgy, those who access what has been called for centuries sacred gnosis, and she should never have had access to that. Over the years, he also found fragments of other accounts similar to his. One of them, handwritten by a monk who lived in the Naples region in the 19th century, described a ritual very similar to the one she witnessed. Symbols drawn with red powder, 7 candles, a book that glows under certain words, and a dark presence that appears during the final intonation. This monk's manuscript mysteriously disappeared after being cited in an academic study. Another, belonging to a missionary priest in Congo in the 1950s, was found with notes that mixed excerpts from the Apocalypse with images of hooded figures inside a Roman church. He died under unexplained circumstances 2 months later. All paths lead to an uncomfortable truth. There is a pattern, a network, an invisible thread that connects centuries of silence and mystery. And she knows it. Carry this awareness like someone carrying a cross. But his greatest pain is not what he saw, nor what he went through. It's silence all around. The silence of those who also know, but chose to remain silent. The silence of those who, out of fear, complacency, or collusion, saw and saw again, but did nothing. This silence is deafening, and that's why she decided to break up with him. Because every day that passes without this truth being said is one more day in which hidden forces continue to act behind the scenes of faith, manipulating crowds, distorting spirituality, desecrating what should be sacred. She doesn't want fame. You don't want recognition. You don't want confrontation. You just want people to know. Let them open their eyes. Stop accepting as absolute truth what is just the surface. And you who made it this far probably feel this way too. You feel like there is something hidden, something that is not told in sermons, which is not said in the textbooks, something the Church will never say openly, but which is slowly being revealed, piece by piece, testimony by testimony, until the entire structure collapses under the weight of the truth. If this story moved you in some way, if you feel like you are facing something real, something that goes beyond simple rumors, Write the phrase in the comments, "The truth always finds a way." And if you want to further strengthen this chain of revelation, also type, "I am part of the awakening." These comments show that we are not alone on this journey for answers. Every word written here increases our reach, connects seekers, strengthens resistance. If what she says is real, we are facing one of the biggest religious conspiracies in history. What else is hidden behind the doors of the Vatican? This question, which seems like something out of a fictional thriller, is what today worries not only independent researchers, but also theologians, historians, and even religious people who are beginning to see with different eyes what is happening inside the largest spiritual institution on the planet. When someone like this, former nun, who dedicated years of her life to faith, stands before the world with such a detailed and disturbing account, it is impossible to simply ignore or dismiss it as delusion. She didn't just bring up a vague memory. It brought precise descriptions of hidden ritual symbols, of practices involving texts that do not appear in the traditional Bible, of celebrations held in underground locations close to the Vatican's secret library, a place that, in itself, is already shrouded in mystery. This library is not accessible to the public, not even to the common clergy. Only a few are authorized to enter its corridors and manipulate its volumes, and many scholars believe that it is there that the greatest secrets of the history of the Church are stored. Ancient documents, apocryphal gospels, correspondence between religious and political leaders, texts that were deliberately excluded from the official narrative, and perhaps records of the occult practices that still take place today behind the golden curtains of faith. And this takes us to a new layer of reflection. If such practices really occur, with the knowledge and even participation of high-ranking members of the Church, how many other truths have been suppressed over the centuries? How many councils? How many papal decisions? How many doctrines were shaped not just for spiritual reasons but to maintain control? How many books were burned? How many monks silenced? How many discoveries were deliberately erased from history to preserve a convenient version of the faith? These are questions that grow with each new fragment revealed, and that are deeply disturbing because they point to a possible system of spiritual manipulation with ramifications that go far beyond religion. The former nun's testimony fits into a disturbing pattern, a pattern that emerges when one crosses historical records of internal persecutions, inexplicable excommunications, hasty renovations of ancient churches, and sudden disappearances of priests and scholars who dared to ask too many questions. Many of these cases were only known to small research circles, but when we look carefully, we see that there are points of convergence. And these points indicate that perhaps there is an underground network, a silent code operating behind the scenes of the Church, protecting practices that should never have survived time, much less remain active in the 21st century. And you who have come this far, who are absorbing every word and starting to put the pieces of this puzzle together, know that this search for answers is not just curiosity, it is a spiritual journey. Because deep down, what is at stake is not just what the Vatican hides, it is the truth about our faith, about the origin of what we believe, about the pillars of spirituality that shaped civilizations. And if there is
something so great and dangerous being hidden, we have a responsibility to seek it, question it, expose it. After all, silence has always been the preferred weapon of those who want to maintain power. But the truth, when it starts to be whispered, spreads like wildfire. Do you believe this revelation? Or do you think it's all just an act? That's a legitimate question. And that is precisely what the Vatican expects you to do. Because when you doubt, when you hesitate, when you back down from
something that challenges everything you've ever believed in, you're exactly where they want you. But what if all this is true? What if this former nun really witnessed something that goes beyond the limits of what is permitted, that tears the veil of organized religion and reveals a face of faith that has been buried, disguised, codified under centuries of liturgy? The simple fact of questioning already puts you in a different place, a place where few have the courage to enter, the territory of forbidden revelations. Her story is not isolated. Over time, figures from within the Church have tried to warn, denounce, and open the eyes of the world to what happens far from the pulpits, far from masses, far from the eyes of the people. They were silenced, ridiculed, some even eliminated. But the truth has an uncomfortable characteristic. It always finds a way to emerge. And when that happens, it doesn't come alone. It brings with it centuries of secrets, layers of sanctified lies, and hidden rituals that, little by little, stop being legends and become documented, studied, and, finally, understood facts. We are talking about a religious system with such deep roots that it touches power, politics, control of the masses, and the spiritual structure of billions of people. When an institution of this size remains silent in the face of complaints like the one we saw here, silence is no longer just an absence of response. It turns into complicity, a complicity that raises the question that should never be ignored. What exactly is being hidden? How many layers of concealment were built to protect this truth? And why would a nun, someone who lived years of service to the faith, be threatened when she tried to speak about what she saw? There is something bigger at stake, something that transcends this single story, something that involves erased texts, secret rituals, censored documents, and a past that the church did everything to bury. But what has been buried is beginning to emerge. And what is emerging will shake everything we were taught. Because when we talk about books banned by the Vatican, of hidden gospels, of revelations that show the true face of Christianity, we are not just telling stories. We are recovering a spirituality that has been kidnapped, reinterpreted, manipulated to serve human interests, disguised as divine. And if you've come this far, it's because something inside you recognizes that this search is true. Because there is a concern that can no longer be ignored. There is an instinct, a calling, an almost spiritual desire to understand what really happened with the teachings of Jesus, with the first centuries of the church, with the texts that were deliberately erased. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about in the next video. What you will see next is even more disturbing. An ancient, completely real manuscript cited by priests, rabbis, and historians over the centuries, and which was deliberately banned from the official biblical canon. We are talking about one of the most feared books by the church, a text that shows a Christ different from the one you know, a doctrine that directly confronts the traditional narrative of Christianity, a book that, according to historical sources, was burned in public squares, but that survived thanks to copies hidden in distant monasteries, some of them today in the possession of private collectors and archaeological foundations. This book is not fiction. It is cited in ancient documents, in conciliar records, and even in letters between bishops and popes who debated whether or not its contents should be revealed. But it wasn't. He was sealed, prohibited, and the justification used was always the same: protect the faithful. But protect from what? Of a truth that challenges established power? Of a revelation that could collapse the dogmatic structure of traditional religion? If this story about the nun has already impacted you, the next chapter will make you rethink everything. Because when you understand why this book was hidden, you will understand why so many other truths were hidden as well. It's like pulling a loose thread in an ancient fabric. With each thread you pull, more things start to come undone. And when you realize it, you are faced with a new scenario. A scenario where faith, truth, and power walk along paths very different from those you were taught. If you've stayed with me this far, it's because this story touched you in some way. And I want to thank you for making it to the end of this video. It shows that you're not like most people, who stop in the middle or ignore what bothers them. You are someone who seeks, who wants to know, who feels that there is something much bigger behind the walls of the Vatican, and who is willing to go to the end to discover the truth. So now, I make you a special invitation. Subscribe to the channel. Here we don't talk about the obvious. We go deep into secrets, behind the scenes, into forgotten documents, always in search of what has been hidden for centuries. Click the subscribe button below and activate the bell, because the next videos will reveal even deeper things to you. And if you made it to the end, I want to ask you a simple but powerful favor. Leave a like in this video. This shows YouTube that this content deserves to be delivered to more people who are also waking up. Your click may be small, but it has a huge impact. And to seal your presence here with us, now comment below on the sentence, "I reached the end because I want to know the truth." This phrase will be our signal, our secret brand. When I see this comment, I will know that you are with me on this journey with your eyes open, looking for what no one else has the courage to show. And it doesn't come out now, because the next video is already appearing on the screen. In it, we will explore the book banned by the Vatican that reveals the true face of Christianity. You can't miss this. Click now, and together we go even deeper into this investigation that could change everything.